virus, you are Lee Radford.
Yes. Guilty.
You are the author of One Yellow Eye. One Yellow Eye follows the story of a scientist who is in a post-apocalyptic world, and close to just when they were about to do the shutdown, her husband gets the virus, and then she obviously hides him while she's trying to find the cure. But the question is she going to be able to find the cure on time and fix her husband and then find a way to tell everybody that, oh yeah, I've been hiding my zombie husband? Or is she not going to be able to do that after all? So just from that alone, do you want to walk us through what led to that concept and why you even decided to write a book like this in the first place?
Yeah, it's a bit of a depressing answer, I'll be totally honest, but I hope the fact that it's inspired by something real and true gives the book a bit of weight and hopefully helps it to connect with people who've been through something similar. Not a zombie apocalypse, I hasten to add.
Definitely.
It was inspired by my experiences of looking after my dad when he was dying, and his terminal illness happened to coincide with COVID. And I always feel at pains to stress that One Yellow Eye is not a pandemic novel, it's not a COVID novel, but the thing that COVID gave all of us was that heightened anxiety about our health and the health of our loved ones. And so for me, I think before we really knew how dangerous COVID was going to be, there was talk of this virus spreading quite quickly in China. And obviously, as people were moving in and out of the country, it was starting to spread. We were starting to hear reports about it. But because it was so mysterious and undefined at the beginning, as somebody whose father was terminally ill, my dad had leukemia. So one of the big challenges with leukemia is that the person loses their immunity. So anything, a common cold, can make them incredibly unwell. So the prospect that there was this virus that had no cure, we didn't know where it had come from, but was starting to spread quite dramatically. I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, how are we going to keep Dad safe from this? And I thought, and I think I joked to myself, I'm going to have to lock him up in the bedroom, because I've got to stop him going out and coming into contact with this virus in case it makes him ill. So that's really where it came from, I think, that sense of, even though it's not explicitly a COVID novel, it was that sense of fear when you have people you love in your life who are maybe immunocompromised or suppressed, or they have chronic health, or they're just elderly. You have that urge to protect them and you worry about them. And knowing that there was a virus that was beginning to spread that we didn't know much about, I think made me panic. And that was definitely for me. So the idea of the novel probably came in about January 2020.
And I think I could feel the depth of the emotion writing, because there's a lot of sadness that comes with the book. And even though we know that, okay, zombies don't really exist, it feels so emotional. Yeah, think it to yourself that, you know, like, why did this have to happen now and all that? But before we get into more details on that, do you want to walk us through how the cover design was and which one came first? Was it the yellow cover with the eye, which by the way is a stunning cover, because that was why I picked
Yeah.
firstly, or was it the second cover that came first? Okay,
The first cover
so
was this cover. So
okay,
this is the US cover,
okay.
and my editor in America, Kim, has become a real mate, and she was really. We both suffer from insomnia quite a lot, so we often message one another in the middle of the night. And she was up in the middle of the night one night thinking about the book cover, and she came across an artist called Alex Ekman Lawn. So the actual original image is by him. And in the original design, his work is so clever. It's like paper cutouts. So if you look at the artwork in real life, this bit is all like different layers of paper. So it's like you can go through into the woman's neck and see the snakes and stuff. So it's kind of gruesome. And we both felt it was just really arresting, but also quite beautiful and quite feminine. So this one came first. And it was immediately vetoed by my UK publisher, who was like, no, that's not going to work in the UK horror market. And as the author, you're like, why not? I don't think I really understand why.
Mhm.
But they tried to explain to me, and I still don't think I completely understood it, but that in the US, the horror market is much bigger, but also broader. And it has room to be I don't
Ver-
know, a little bit less, a bit more elaborate or a bit less obvious. And whereas in the UK market, the horror market is smaller but growing, but they felt that it was more on the commercial end of horror. And I would agree, because it deals with somebody who's a zombie and it's about suffering and a lot of the elements of kind of looking after somebody and the procedures and the experiments that Kester, the main character,
yeah,
does, you couldn't put in a regular commercial fiction novel. But what my UK publisher wanted to do was make it sit more in the mainstream. So I, it's kind of like a punch to the face
yeah,
as design goes. It's, you can't really miss it. It does sort of follow you around the bookshop when you're in there, which is great. Um, and it was, this one was like one design, one email between me and my editor, and I was like, this is perfect. This took way more time, but
mhm,
the lady who designed it, Kirin, is a genius. And we just kept, she kept sending me lots of emails in which I went, no. And then she'd send me, oh yeah, no, we're not having that one. And then eventually she sent me this. And I think I had to sit with it for a couple of days because it wasn't what I expected. I thought I would be quite clear on what I wanted from cover, but when it's your own book and suddenly you start to see somebody else's interpretation of what you've written, it's quite daunting, and you want to make the right decision. You suddenly feel really responsible for everybody else who's working with you and the publisher and stuff. So but everybody felt that it was really in your face, and that was what they wanted to achieve with it. And so, yes, that's how we got to that. So they're totally different, and I think I quite like that. Actually, I quite like that. I've got two such completely disparate covers.
exactly. But they're so different, but they're also extremely gorgeous in their own ways.
Thank you.
I hadn't even, it wasn't like I heard about this book beforehand or on TikTok or anything. I had no clue. But I was in the bookstore and I just saw this eye. I'm like, what's going on? you know? So the yellow one is extremely eye catching. I love it. And it's part of why I carried, I think if you go to my Bookstagram, I have so many pictures of the book in different locations because it just looks good everywhere. It's
Thank you.
so let's get into Kester as the main character.
Yeah.
Think Kester is very strong-willed, and I also think, in a sense, she sort of lost herself when her husband got the virus. She like they had been so well matched that she had merged her identity with him in a sense, and so once he got turned. At the back of her mind, it felt like she also just gave up on life and was like, if he's not coming back, then to hell with everything. So how was it writing such a character, especially since you have like personal experience of fear in terms of losing your dad and all that? Was it difficult, and how were you able to push through the difficulties? Because I'm just imagining like there would have been moments of crying when you're writing. I'm a very emotional person, so that's why I can imagine moments of crying while trying to bring a story like that to life. Yeah.
Yeah, do you know what? Honestly, it was really cathartic. I wrote a first novel probably about 18 months after my dad died. It will probably never see the light of day. I like to describe it as just 120,000 words of me screaming into the void and bashing my laptop, and it kind of didn't have a plot or a narrative. It was just me kind of full of rage. And then I did actually submit the angry novel to literary agents, didn't make any progress with it. And normally I would have, old me would have given up and thought, well, that's it, just not meant to write a novel. But I kind of felt like I owed it to my dad, given how much he'd suffered and what we'd been through as a family, that I felt it was important to tell his story, which was that people really, you are willing to do anything to save somebody when you love them, even when you know what you're doing is in vain. And a lot of what we were doing, it was really hard to figure out what we were doing because it was in my dad's best interests, and what we were doing for ourselves because, frankly, selfishly, we wanted to keep him with us. And it's such a hard balance to strike. I mean, I can only imagine what it must be like for a parent looking after a child. It's more natural when it's the child looking after the parent, but that sense of making somebody else's decisions for them is really, really difficult. So I felt like I actually needed to get a lot of what I'd been through off my chest, and I needed to work through it in a practical way. I didn't have therapy after my dad died, and I did very much put my mum first. So a lot of our sort of dealing with the grief centered on her, because my parents had been together for 55 years. So her life was changed, irrevocably. Whereas I still had my husband, and, my brother had his wife. So we had some support. So we needed to focus on my mum. But I did find that I just wasn't dealing with a lot of, I very much compartmentalized everything, I think. So I needed to get it down on paper. I needed to, almost like a journal, a kind of, to go through the things that had really devastated me with my dad and put them into Kester. And so much of what she goes through in the novel, I certainly never had I was terrible at science at school, awful. So I never had her medical abilities.
Hmm.
But when you do look after somebody, you do, when you're a carer full time, you switch into a hybrid role where you are less and less the daughter, and more you become medicalized, making decisions for somebody. And you constantly doubt yourself about whether you have the knowledge to be making those decisions. But if you don't make them, nobody else is going to do it. So there's such a lot of fumbling in the dark, trying to do the right thing. And so often I felt like I was doing the wrong thing. I was never sure if what we were doing was right. So I felt it was really important to write a character who was morally and ethically conflicted, because I think that's real. I wanted somebody to be obsessively driven by their love for somebody, because I think that's relatable to most people, but that we don't always end up doing the right thing. You're so focused on trying to do the right thing, you can end up doing the wrong thing indirectly. And that kind of moral and ethical grey area was something that I wanted to explore. I think really because it encapsulated how I'd felt about living with my dad in the last 6 months of his life in particular. And I felt I could write it honestly. I think when you haven't, when you're a debut writer, you're struggling for ways to make yourself feel like you can write and you have a story to tell. And I think there is value in writing about something that you know, because you can inject it with maybe a little bit of authority or something real that you hope will then make a connection with the person who's reading your book.
Honestly. And first of all, I even have to say, for this to be a debut novel, like you outdid yourself. To be, whenever I read a book that's so
Thank
good, I
you.
find out that this is the author's first book. I'm like, how? How will you? Like your first book is really good. And I even also want to talk about the topic of selfishness in loss, because
Yeah.
I think that most people, when you're talking being morally ethical and things like that. Nobody really wants to talk about the rage or the selfishness that comes with losing someone that's so close to you. I also lost my dad, so this is like dead dad's.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So, but I just want to talk about that topic as well, because there are certain parts in the book where Kester looks at, her husband, I think Tim. So it's been a couple of months, but I think she was looking at him and she had a thought where it's like, is he still alive beneath this shell of a person? Now that he's a zombie, is his soul still in there? And if his soul is still there, am I causing him pain by keeping him alive when he may secretly want to go? And I remember reading that part of her thoughts about the thing and almost being a bit upset at Tim at the idea that he would even want to go. you know, I was like, can't you see all what Kesta is doing? You better come back to life.
Stick around and just be a hot zombie husband. Come on, endure him.
So that selfishness in itself, I really like that you put it there. And how would you describe, like, were you scared to sort of write about someone being selfish in death, like in terms of people close to you who may have known of your experience and things like that, or those of us now who know your experience? Did you have any fear that someone might judge such a character? You know,
Oh, I think you can't fear it. I think the hardest thing to get to grips with as a writer is respecting the fact that once the novel is published, it's no longer yours. It
Oh,
belongs to everybody who reads it.
mm,
And everybody has absolute entitlement to their own opinion on it. And
mm,
I know there will be people who will hate the novel because they will hate Kester,
mm.
because they will not be able to look past the fact that she makes some shady decisions, and, you know, she's secretive and she's obsessive and she lies and she steals and
It's-
she does some despicable stuff. And for some people, they will judge her very negatively and harshly because of that. Um, I I don't know if it helps to have lost somebody or to have been through grief. To maybe it just gives you a little bit more compassion,
for her.
and a little that you give somebody a little bit more leniency. Um, but equally, I think that I hope one of the things that the character of Kester does is it makes us question how we behave with people that we know who are suffering, and how patient we are with people who are going through grief or who are maybe going through any personal challenge in their lives. People can become quite fatigued by other people's grief really quickly. And, you know, I mean, I'm British and we're so uptight and embarrassed by other people's grief. And, you know, if it embarrasses us if somebody cries and stuff. And people very quickly stop talking about the person who's died, or they don't have the vocabulary or the emotional maturity to ask questions. You know, that it's okay to upset somebody. Maybe they want to talk to you, maybe they do want to get it off their chest, but we don't always handle illness, grief, the difficult stuff of life. We can't just ignore it and pretend it isn't happening. And to a degree, that is what Kester has done at the beginning. She's handcuffed him to the spare bedroom radiator because she can't deal with it. And she's trying to let the science catch up with her so that she can hopefully do something constructive. I think the biggest challenge for Kester is because she has so much medical and scientific knowledge, she already knows that what she's doing is very likely in vain,
Yeah.
but she doesn't stop trying. And I think fundamentally that's a human experience. And I think it's a good one to write about because we all go through that to varying degrees, maybe not in quite such a kind of crazy, drunken, chaotic way that Kester does, but we all go through that a little bit where we just feel like I am going to fall apart, but you find the resolve, the reserve somewhere to keep going.
Yeah, that's true. And I think when it comes to people dealing with loved ones and grief, they can definitely pick a couple of notes from this. Just seeing how Kester gets irritated with everyone because she is like she's looking at everybody like you guys have no
Yeah,
idea.
yeah,
You
you do
I,
not know.
you know
You do
no
not know.
don't try and cheer me up right now. I don't
Yeah,
want to hear it. You know, when people come to her and they're trying to say he's probably in a better place, it was time. She's like, no, I don't want to
yeah,
hear that. You know, that's not the type of comfort that I need. She just
yeah,
wants to like go through everything on her own and be so independent. And I think also reading her journey, anyone who has gone through grief, reading her story would make them understand you don't necessarily have to go through it alone because in this case, you know, it may not be a zombie apocalypse, you never know. But you can open up. I think because her case was also so sort of like contraband, because she knew that if she had told anybody, they would have taken him to the lab immediately,
yeah.
and she wouldn't even have been able to see him. She probably wouldn't have been allowed to practice with the scientist anymore. So I even want to get to the title of the book. I don't think I've
Mm,
there yet. The title is One Yellow Eye, and when you read
yes.
the book, it's like, oh, obviously that title makes sense, you know.
Yeah.
Was it as straight for you, would you say? Like, did you have a couple of different titles lined up and then you settled on One Yellow Eye?
I did have to justify it to the publisher because it's a weird title. It's actually a line from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I
Oh,
would say that was the biggest, yeah, I would say the two biggest influences on me with the book were the film Shaun of the Dead by Edgar Wright, which is like, for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's maybe 20 years old now. It's got Nick Frost and Simon Pegg in it. And there is a zombie outbreak in, I think, North London, and it's very funny, it's very tongue in cheek, and how they deal with it is to laugh at everything. And so I am somebody who tries to make a joke out of everything, but particularly things that are difficult. And my dad was like that as well. So even though, you know, when he died and was incredibly unwell, it was a horrible challenge. He would always crack jokes. That was like his coping mechanism. So I wanted to write something that had humour in it. The other inspiration was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because fundamentally, what Victor Frankenstein has to do with the monster, and which he is useless at doing for most of that novel, is accepting that it's his responsibility. He has created this monster. He has been responsible for its suffering, its loneliness, the carnage that the monster, lays wake behind it. Um, and this kind of this aching of this monster's soul, and he doesn't want to accept responsibility that he is its creator. And for me, there is a line in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein where Victor Frankenstein acknowledges the judgment of this one yellow eye looking back at it. And I felt that that was something that I had found most challenging about looking after my dad, was making decisions on his behalf and not always being completely confident that I was doing the right thing or that I was doing what he wanted. I did feel sometimes my dad was so lovely. Your dad was probably also really lovely.
Yeah.
And dads are very good, or my dad anyway, a lot of dads are very good at doing the thing their kids want them to do. And there were a lot of times where I felt my dad was subjecting himself to treatment because it's what I wanted or it's what we wanted as a family. He put himself through so much torture really to try and cling on to life. And that's hard to accept, that you've had a response, you've played a role in
Oh,
putting something through somebody through something that's so awful. So that was why. And fundamentally, when you are in a partnership, it doesn't have to be a marriage like Kester and Tim are in.
yeah.
You do make decisions as like you're a unit,
Yep.
right? And
That's her.
sometimes one of you is in charge and sometimes the other one is in charge, but you try to make decisions together.
Yeah.
And when one of you is impaired, as Tim is, Kester, she just has to hope she's making the right decision, but she can't know for sure. And I think that can be agonizing. So that was why I went for that title, because at the heart of this, it's the agony that she has to bear in in keeping her husband going and hoping that she's doing the right thing without ever being able to have the proof that she is.
That's a really, really good answer. That's a beautiful answer. Like the source of the story makes the name even mean so much more now that I know that. That's really
Uh,
lovely. While writing the book, would you say there was anything or any decision you had made about a character that ended up surprising you? Like with the Kester and her decisions and things like that, was it sort of like maybe you had planned this chapter would go this way and this is how the story will go, but then light bulb moment, you're like, wait, and then it just sort of shocks you that you even thought about that angle in the first place.
Yeah, I think I thought that the character of Dudley, there's a character called Dudley who works with Kester, and
Yeah.
he's kind of a bit like the male version of Kester, or he's like Kester if she hadn't been in a healthy, loving relationship. So he's
Mm.
socially quite awkward, he's very involved with his work, and I think he lives vicariously through Kester and her marriage, which is quite sad. And I think I had instinctively sort of wanted to write him a little bit more like a slightly creepy character who was looking to take advantage of kind of Kester's emotional state. And actually, I felt that that didn't seem true. And he gets to play a small heroic role in the novel. And I felt that it was important actually to have like a platonic male female work relationship that actually ends up being positive and doesn't have any kind of side or agenda to it. And he gets to and I think Kester realizes that of everybody that she works with and everybody that she has in her life, that he is the only one maybe who would understand what she's going through, because he would undoubtedly do the same, because the two of them are very similar, even though they have a kind of totally platonic relationship. And I think through the character of Dudley, Kester also starts to realize that she hasn't always necessarily been a very good friend, that in just because she's, you know, suffering with her losing her husband, she has perhaps been oblivious to other people's needs and other people's desire to have, you know, more of a friendship relationship with her, because she is quite myopic in her kind of focus in life. So I think it's weird when you write a novel, because the bits that tend to really change what you're doing are when you start editing them. But for me, editing when the publishers came on board, because I wrote the novel quite quickly and I felt like I was able to stick quite clearly to what I wanted to achieve with it. But it's only when you suddenly have lots of other voices contributing their opinions, having read the novel, that you start to maybe reframe a little bit the kind of characters that you've got in it. So I wouldn't say there was anybody who was a massive surprise, but Dudley definitely, I gave him a slightly more heroic arc in the end.
Yeah, and I think it did justice to the story actually, because there was a point where I thought it was going in that direction of him,
Yeah,
like, but then later on he showed himself to actually be a truly sort of good person to Kester
yeah.
in terms of care. Like he cared about her for himself and not just for the ulterior motives, I think, at the end of the day. So how do you say you go about in building tension? Because like I said, while reading the book, there were many times where I was like, oh my god, like I close the book and be like, oh my god, they're about to catch her right now. So how was that process for you?
I think I have to give credit here to the people who worked on the book with me, because
Okay.
I think it is quite hard, particularly when it's your first novel, to
Mm,
be aware of ratcheting the stakes up and increasing the tension and all of those kinds of things. And
mm,
that is where, when you have two really experienced editors or a reader or an agent looking at your work, it's such a valuable process. It's incredibly stressful. It makes you pull your hair out and want to drink a lot,
mhm,
because it makes you scrutinize everything and second guess everything that you're doing. But having other people say, is this stressful enough? Is enough happening here? It reminds you, because the hardest thing I think as a writer is you take it for granted that the reader knows as much as you do. And I'm terrible at not always being clear and assuming I've been clear where actually I haven't at all. So I think probably the tension elements came in maybe the second or the third draft of the novel, where I'd got the story out, I'd got the characters out, and then you're looking at making sure, um, are people being given enough to do? Is there enough conflict? And the kind of the ratcheting of the tension with near misses, and making sure that not everything is going to plan. And I think because Tim is in I suppose we have sort of three levels of potential threat: one in the home, one at work, and one when Kester is out and about trying to live her life. But these are three areas for her where things could go wrong, and she could betray herself or she could be betrayed. So I think whenever you have a secret, and of course she has shared the secret with no one, a lot of that tension comes from that inner monologue, I suppose, and the things that the character is doing. And then it's about thinking, who are all of the threats to that secret? And Jess, as a friend, she's a threat to the secret because she'd quite like Kester to hurry up and stop grieving so that they could, maybe go to Benidorm together and have a holiday. And and Dudley has brought her into this Project Dawn, where suddenly she's going to be in close proximity to the cure that they're trying to work on. So I suppose you just have to think about, okay, this is my character's story, this is what she's trying to do, and then look for all of these little moments in that timeline where things could go wrong for her. And I think it is Patricia Highsmith who says, if you have a character, make sure there's always something going wrong for her. And if you've only got one thing going wrong, have something else go wrong. So you're kind of tightening the screws bit by bit. But I think, yes, definitely that is something where the editorial process was really helpful, because having other people look at the story and keep reminding me, so the little author questions and comments in the margin when you're looking at a manuscript, and they're like, is she stressed enough here? She should be more stressed. Or, have you thought about somebody knocking on the door of her apartment? That kind of thing. They're good reminders, because when you lose yourself in that fog of writing a draft, those are the little things that you forget about. So yeah, so I don't think I can take all the credit for that. I think that was a team effort.
Well, they did really good at that because especially the stress at home, I think, was the worst of all. She had me so stressed out. I was like, oh no, can you go back to No, I was really worried for her. I think that was well executed. I think speaking about the research, you already mentioned obviously with your personal experience, you were able to pick up one or two things, but did you have to do more research in getting like specific words or specific processes written down? Or was it just like also from other books that were an inspiration to this one?
Um, I think most of my relatable experiences came from my mum being a biomedical scientist when I was a kid.
Mm.
So I wanted to kind of honour her profession. What she did for a living, particularly when I was a kid, was just endlessly fascinating to me. So even though I didn't particularly have the vocabulary to understand what she was doing or to be able to talk about it, it was I mean, she worked in a laboratory. She had to wear a white coat. She'd pick me up from school looking really glamorous, but then she'd put like her white scrubs on, and we'd go into her laboratory. It would stink of formaldehyde and all of these preservative fluids. And there were microscopes everywhere, and there were strange looking knives and things. It was quite sinister. But she was incredibly frank about what she did. You probably wouldn't be allowed to do it now. This is a benefit from having grown up in the 80s, where it was like the Wild West in terms of health and safety, I think. Because I would just get to go to the lab, and my mum would ask me what I wanted to look at. So she would bring little slides for me to try and look down the microscope at, and she would try to explain to me what they were. And when we were at home, she would have these great big medical textbooks, and I would flick through them with no idea what I was looking at. But they were so lurid and colourful, and I just thought, God, this is so incredibly clever that she is able to look at this stuff that makes no sense to me whatsoever, and she can like decipher it. And I knew that the thing that she was doing was to like help diagnose someone with an illness. And so so to me it was like sorcery. So I thought she was like legitimately this was witchcraft, and my mum was like some kind of high priestess, or something, because it was just like, wow, I don't understand what any of this is, but it seems really cool. And so I wanted to try and get across, I think, like the sights, the smells, the vibe, and the responsibility that she had to the patients that she was working with, that kind of thing. So I suppose, and the thing that, both my parents were really honest with my brother and I about what they did for a living, and we will probably have quite adult conversations at the dinner table about what they were doing. And my mum would say, I had to do a post-mortem today, and I'd be like 10, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I know that means cutting up a dead body and finding out how that person died. So I think I wasn't squeamish about death and disease. I was fascinated that this was a job, and that my mum treated it with great reverence,
Yeah.
but that actually it was really, really interesting and important. So I was familiar with some of the terminology, like the histology, the pathology, the elements of her job.
Mm.
And so I knew enough of what she did in terms of the processes of her work. But mostly, I think like the weight of responsibility that was already known to me through watching her. that it gave me, I suppose, a starting point. And then in terms of researching the other elements of the diseases and things, and positing the, the possible like origins of this zombie virus, that was lots of research on looking at viruses. If we look at, excuse me,
Sorry.
like all those kind of classic hallmarks of zombies, of bleeding through the eyes, and the really lumbering gait, and sometimes the head is in a really weird position. And I
Yeah.
didn't want my zombies to be kind of cannibalistic and craven stuff. I wanted them to be a bit more stupefied, but for the virus obviously to be spread by biting. So I looked at different viruses that would manifest in certain symptoms. And then I tried, so thinking about things like Ebola. Of course, causes mass hemorrhaging, and then things like a lot of those other Marburg virus and hantavirus and all of these unusual things that are on the periphery of most people's understanding, but that are not necessarily a constant threat to most of us. But looking at ways in which they might mix. And because I bought myself some creative license because I, picked a virus that doesn't exist, but I did want to root it in viruses that do exist. So one of the viruses that I look at is a real virus, but it has not jumped to humans yet. So this is purely a virus that impacts animals, and specifically reptiles, and it hasn't transferred to humans. So I kind of suggest in the novel that it does, and look for ways in which that might have happened. Um, so again, I just wanted to hopefully um, create a world that felt like a legitimate world for the reader, but
Mm.
also to give that sense of, again, I suppose, threat, of feeling like we're trying to get to the answer to this,
Yeah.
because it could mutate, it could become worse, and we don't fully understand it. And I think so much of scientific research is, it is guesswork. It's educated guesswork, but it's guessing, and when you don't know something definitively, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, that's a good one actually. It keeps you hooked all the way. Would you say there's a particular conversation you want to be started? Like when someone is done reading One Yellow Eye, what do you want them to go on to talk about to others or to be their thought process of afterwards? Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the nicest and most humbling, actually, aspects of publishing this novel is being able to speak to readers about their experiences of grief,
Mm,
and that's been a real privilege. So everywhere I've been, I've had readers coming up to me, whether they've read the novel or not, and just saying, I lost my mum, or I lost my partner, and I felt completely alone, and like nobody understood what I was going through.
mm,
And that if by writing about my experiences of grief, it maybe resonates with somebody else, or helps them feel that maybe the weird feelings that they felt were triggered by their grief, like rage, like, all the weird things, like suddenly I was terrible. I couldn't concentrate after my dad died. I just had no ability to focus. And I do think if it's a real, um, like a real primary loss, I don't think you're ever the same person after
yeah.
you experience it changes you. It can't not. And so other people, friends, family, they can find that change in you quite frustrating, and that can further compound your grief, I think, if you feel like people aren't cutting you any slack, or aren't giving you the space to grieve. So I hope that if people have lost somebody, it will give them some comfort, and maybe make them feel like the complicated feelings they had around grief, they're not alone in those, and that these things are survivable. You're changed, but you carry on. And that for maybe people who haven't experienced loss, or don't understand it, or don't feel it is as transformative as it can be, that maybe it gives them a little bit of insight into something that somebody they might be close to is going through, and maybe it will give them a different perspective on that. I don't know, but it's been nice hearing, stories from people
Yeah.
who have read the book and just sort of saying, it made me feel a bit less alone, or you spoke about how I felt, and it was something that I felt hard to get across to people who hadn't been through it.
Yeah, are you looking to keep writing more books? And if so, are they going to be in the same sort of like thriller type of, I would say thriller with soul, because
Mhm.
just horror in itself, it has depth to it. So would that be more your line, or you don't want to be in a box yet? You just want to see what comes, things like that?
I think in publishing, they really want you to be in a box. They want you to be in a genre, and they want you to write similar things.
Yeah.
So my next book is um, it is a book about possession.
Okay.
So it is a woman. It's basically about how sort of childhood and adolescent shame infect the fabric of who we are as adults. But it's a possession novel in which an item of clothing, which is a three-piece suit that this woman gets at a shop in New York, is possessed, and how that changes her life, her attitude, and whether it kind of has a terrible outcome for her and the people around her. So I think publishers want you to, I mean, I like, I suppose I read a lot of speculative fiction. So anything science fiction, horror, in that kind of space. Um, but I like a propulsive plot, and I like there to be plenty going on, and I like a mystery to solve. And I think it's really difficult to make sure, it's certainly hard following up a novel and writing a second novel, because you want to make sure that there's enough in common with the first book so that people who read the first book don't then hate the second book. So that's where I'm at the moment, just kind of completely concerned that everybody's going to hate book two because it's not enough like book one. um but yes, so I like read I think I hope to carry on writing about complicated human emotions and complicated human experiences and moral dilemmas and all of the kind of things that trigger us, like guilt and shame and um, dysfunctional relationships and the toll they take on us, and how we try to be human in a world that makes us less so repeatedly. But yeah, I definitely, my second novel, I think, is more outwardly humorous. And when I handed the first draft into my publishers, they were like, we'd like more anguish. So I was like, oh, anguish. They were like, yeah, there's not enough suffering and anguish in it. So clearly, I'm going to be marked now as somebody who has to write about suffering and anguish. And I was trying to write it as a bit of a palate cleanse, like, whew, I've really put Kester through the ringer in book one. Let's write something silly about clothes set in New York. And
Yeah.
they were like, no, no, ladles of anguish. Please give us more of that. So whether I've done it, I have no idea.
I'm excited. I'm very excited for this. Like, concept in itself is already very intriguing to me because I like books where you always have to think beyond what you would usually think about. You have to question the character. It's not just, oh, this person is bad and they do bad things, or this person is good and they do. It's like this person is a person and this is their circumstance.
Yeah,
And
and you don't have to like them. I think
exactly.
this has been a difficult thing, is like, particularly female characters, we're
Yeah.
supposed to like them and imagine them as our friends, but you should be able to read a book that's maybe like you on your worst day,
Mm.
because that's a human thing, isn't it? None of us are perfect. We've all got our flaws. And I think that's real, and it makes for a real reading experience.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like when people hate a character, they are so quick to hate the entire book. Like if the character's name is Fumi and Fumi has done something wrong, then everybody hates the whole book. They're like,
Yeah,
oh my god, how?
done.
But I think that's what makes the book more interesting for me when I can question the character when the character is really complex. So I'm definitely looking forward to your next book. Thank you so much for this. I look
Thank
forward to.
you. It's been so much fun. I've never done one of these before, and now I feel like, I can talk to you every day. This is great. We should do this like once a week. But thank you for having me, because it was really brilliant, and I'm so touched that you enjoyed the book and that you are happy to talk to me about it. So,
Have a great rest of today.
you too. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.